We're going to be in Luke chapter 12 tonight, and we're going to look at verses 49 through 59. Finish out the chapter. I'm looking forward next Sunday, or Saturday actually, and Sunday, we will be in chapter 13 of Luke. But this is a little bit of a weird section. I was meeting with another guy today who's in ministry, a scholar, and he was just mentioning that out of the four Gospels, Mark is his favorite Gospel, which is rare I hear somebody say that. It's not that Mark is any less, it's just shorter. And so a lot of times people go to one of the other synoptic Gospels or to John. And he mentioned something to me. He said, Luke is my least favorite Gospel to preach out of or to teach out of. And I said, why is that? And his response was, I don't understand Luke as much. It's similar to Matthew and Mark, but in Luke, Jesus talks a lot more than he does in Matthew and Mark, all right? And that's true. There's fewer stories, more teaching, but the other part, as we talked about it, is that it's hard to figure out sometimes Luke's flow. And quite frankly, sometimes it's right there on the page, like when we get to chapter 15, when we're in that passage, I'll show you a flow to that entire chapter. Usually it's broken up into different parts, but that entire chapter should go together, and there's a flow that happens to it. Other times, you get to places like chapter 12, and it's really hard because a lot of these sections, I'm not quite sure what is going on with them. I've been accused of being the kind of person in conversation that likes rabbit trails. Anyone else like that at all? I don't mind rabbit trails and stuff. But it's a little bit hard because the way chapter 12 is sort of put together, it reminds me a little bit of Proverbs. When you study Proverbs, the whole book is a book about wisdom, but man, it jumps around a lot. And it's kind of hard to get a flow sometimes for that. So I'm saying that because as we dig into the last part of this chapter, it's only, 49 to 59 we're covering, but seems very much like three very distinct passages. And they're not three passages that I want to take time and develop three whole sermons on each one of those passages. I could do that, but I want to cover all three tonight. I would like to try to get through Luke in about a year and a half and not take longer than that. John MacArthur, when he was younger, preached through Matthew. And any guesses how long it took him? 9 years. That's a long time, right? But it's because he kept taking every little piece and developing it into big sermons. I just don't have the patience for that. And I think that almost all of you would agree. That you don't have the patience to listen to me for that long. So we're gonna cover these three, and it will be almost like three different topics. Maybe the theme of it, though, with the entire chapter is that Luke is gathering together different teachings of Jesus, and it's a reminder to them of how his teaching is different than the teachings of the Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, and teachers of the law. He's trying to let them know, look, you've seen my ministry and my teaching for 3 years now. Now we're headed to the cross. Once I'm gone and your apostles being sent out, this is the type of ministry you're to have. So with that, we left off last Sunday talking about being prepared for the second coming of Christ. This is what we pick up with verse 49. I came to cast fire on the earth, and would that it were already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. Do you think I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For from now on in one house there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Wow. You look at this, and this doesn't seem normal for the way we think of Christianity, right? Jesus is flat out saying, hey, come to bring fire. There's going to be division. People are going to be fighting. We always like to think of Christianity as something that unifies people, and we should all be about unity and loving on people and stuff. And incidentally, as we go through these three sections, at the end, we're going to have a question and answer time. So just as you're processing this stuff, if there's a question you have, you'll get a chance afterwards to ask it, as long as it's not a gotcha question. If it's a gotcha question, I will throw something at you. I look at this, and I think it's important for us to grab a hold of this. Jesus at one time is the Prince of Peace. So if you go all the way back to Luke chapter 2, and you look at the proclamation of Jesus being born and what the angels sing, they talk about this king, this Messiah who's born, bringing peace on the earth. And in fact, I hate to break this to you, but Christmas is right around the corner, and you're going to hear that word sung about over and over again. My guess is you will probably see ornaments and yard signs with the word peace on it. And yet, what we see here seems to be the complete opposite. What is going on? Is Jesus contradicting himself? And the answer is no. In the first few verses, he says that he is bringing fire, that there will be a baptism, and that there's going to be division. Fire, a baptism, and division. The fire part he's talking about within the context of the previous passages is the judgment that will happen on the earth someday. There will be a judgment. And to the Jewish people, fire usually was one of two things. Either a symbol of God's presence being with them, his glory, his Shekinah glory, or a symbol of judgment taking place. And with this, in this context, it is definitely a symbol of judgment. On one hand, there is going to be judgment that will happen. But as we read previously in the chapter, God has forestalled things because he doesn't want anybody to perish, okay? It's one of these things where it is a reality that will take place, but the life, the ministry, the death, burial, resurrection, ascension of Jesus, and his return is all about forestalling that time of fiery judgment so that as many people whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life will be saved. Absolutely incredible when you look at that. He doesn't want anyone to perish. And so he warns and he warns. He talks about a baptism. What kind of baptism are we talking about? In the previous chapter, he said that there would only be one sign he was going to give to this evil and corrupt generation, and that sign was the sign of Jonah, that he would be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. And think about that with Jonah. Jonah chapter 2 is a passage of poetry in the Old Testament. But when you look at it, Jonah, as he is in the belly of this fish, he's cast into the water, a baptism, into the belly of a fish. All of his language he uses in his poetry and the song that he has is describing himself as being judged and being in Hades. He is in Sheol, the grave. And it's this very interesting passage that is both his reality that he is experiencing, but is also a prophetic poem about the Messiah being in the grave. And Jesus is alluding to that. There is a baptism that will take place for him, and it is the baptism of Jonah. 3 days, 3 nights in Sheol, the ground, the grave. And the last part, he's not bringing peace on earth, but there's going to be division. Now, is it the goal that when Jesus came that he said, all right, here I am. I am now in this synagogue and I'm opening up a scroll of Isaiah and I'm reading what my purpose here is all about. It's about division. No. What it is his goal isn't division, but the truth he is bringing naturally causes division. Because people aren't lovers of the truth. People don't love the truth. They don't want to hear it. And so there's rebellion that takes place. You look at this in the description, they'll be divided father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother. That sounds awful. And he's saying these things are going to happen because of the truth I'm bringing. The one that always confuses me is the one that's the mother-in-law against the daughter-in-law, because that just seems to naturally happen in and of itself. But when you really look at this, the issue is the gospel of Jesus Christ, if received and responded to, brings peace. If mocked, scoffed, fought against, ignored, it brings division. That's the reality of the good news of Jesus Christ. People do not want a king. They want a savior, but they do not want a king. The next section, Jesus goes on and he says this, verse 54. He also said to the crowds, when you see a cloud rising in the west, you say at once, a shower is coming, and so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, there will be scorching heat, and it happens. You hypocrites! I will say I am taking a lot of joy saying that. it's just fun. You hypocrites! You know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? Interesting passage on what is going on here. Jesus is just pointing out that there is a natural discernment that we have by living our lives. We're able to look at things and know what is going on. I appreciate a lot of you, a lot of people at our church. I keep having people say these great words of encouragement to me over and over again. In fact, just before we started, I heard it in here. Someone looked at me and said, oh, he's young. Thank you. Thank you. Because the other half of our church does not think so. And it's at an interesting stage that I'm at. I'm 51, and I'm at a place where I'm in the middle. And I keep getting some people saying I'm young, but this is what happens with me. I am driving around with my kids, and they'll be like, oh, look at that housing development right there. And I'll be like, well, when I was a boy, there were woods there, Or I start pointing out things like that. And one of the craziest things for me, I used to think it was like wives' tales, but I'm like, there's times my body starts aching. And I'm like, man, my body's aching. And then I'll tell Cam, like, oh, the weather's changing, right? And anyone else like that? Thank you. Wait, hold your hand up. Those are the honest people. The honest old people. There's something with that. Like, it just changes. We're able to look out, and you can see when the seasons are changing very clearly. When we lived in Bend, Oregon, we were really shocked because on a Sunday night after church, we went out to Dairy Queen with a bunch of the people. And, during the day, it was like September, and it was really warm. We were still wearing shorts, and everything was great. We went into Dairy Queen, and we walked out, and we were freezing. Like, we were shocked. We were like, what just happened? Night and day difference. And they were all like, oh, yeah, it's that time of year. And we were like, what do you mean? And they said, well, this is the time of year it goes from summer to winter. And we were like, what? And they said, yeah, we don't have fall or spring. It just goes from summer to winter and winter to summer. And we were shocked because that's kind of what happened. But the locals knew it that quick, what was going on. They knew the signs on the trees. They knew what to look for in the mountains. I mean, everything. Jesus is saying an obvious statement here. But he's baffled by the people that their eyes aren't open enough to see what is going on right around them. The Messiah that they had been praying for, sacrificing for, was right there in front of them. We're going to come up on a place in the gospel where he's going to give his grief because the hour of their salvation passed them by, and they knew it not. They weren't paying attention. And the same thing applies within this passage because it's connected to what we studied with on Sunday for us today. The signs of the time. Sometimes they talk about it in terms of being able to watch the weather and seeing what's happening and registering there's a change taking place. The most common illustration is a sign of labor, that you can tell when a woman is getting close to having her child. With my daughter Kayla, who just had Cal 2 weeks ago. It was 2 weeks ago. I was up here speaking, and we started getting the text messages. I'm in labor, right? What did I say? Oh, I'm getting them all mixed up. Okay. Good grief, Shiloh. Whatever his name is. That one. Another sign of getting older. Right? You look at it, and there was a time 3 weeks before that where she thought she might start going into labor. She was having Braxton Hicks contractions, right? And it was one of those things where she's like, oh boy, this feels like it. And it was her body letting her know this is coming in the future. The same thing happens and has been happening with everything around us. We are not quite at the point yet today where it's labor and happening right now. Braxton Hicks contractions definitely are happening, but it could happen any time. Anytime. You might get an email from me this week. I've been thinking the last 2 days about just sending out an email just to remind our church, hey, today could be the day. Tonight could be the night. Are we ready? Would it change the way we operate? What kinds of signs are there? Well, I mentioned on Sunday a book that I'm encouraging people to read. This is Max Lucado's newest book. I'm really perplexed by this because Max Lucado is probably the most prolific and popular Christian author who's alive today. And yet half the people I'm saying about this book are like, who's Max Lucado? But he's written so many books, and both children's and adult books. What children's books did he write? Do you remember? What? Egg, corn, and oak? Acorn. Oh, acorn. Okay. Yeah, gotcha. Okay. He's written a bunch. You are special. That's a good one. Yeah. Not me. I'm not. Yeah. She's all, it's okay, honey. You're special. Yeah, the book, You Are Special. Our girls love that one, a kid's book. But Max Lucado is a pastor and author. He's in, I believe, in Texas. And he's been around for a long time. Incredible author and teacher. He, this last year, taught through Revelation and completely changed his viewpoint. Max Lucado was always amillennial in the way he viewed the end times, meaning that right now we are in the millennial reign of Christ, and 1,000 years is just figurative. It's not meant literal, and this is the time of the reign of Christ. What happened with Max Lucado, though, when he decided for the first time to teach through Revelation, is he was getting ready and studying for it. And as he was studying Daniel chapter 9, which is one of the most messianic prophecies in the entire Bible, it says right at the beginning of Daniel chapter 9 that he was praying and studying the book of Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah says that the Israelites would be in exile for 70 years. 70 years. And Daniel saw that and realized that 70 years was almost up and God was going to do something. And it's just incredible prayer interactions. You get into prophecy, angels, demons, all kinds of stuff. But Max Lucado looked at that and it dawned on him, wait a second. I have been taught my whole life that these numbers in Revelation are purely figurative. And yet, when Daniel saw a similar number in a prophecy from Jeremiah, he took it as literal. Maybe I need to rethink what I've been taught about the book of Revelation. And maybe, just maybe, the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ isn't figurative, it's literal. And as he started exploring Scripture, things just unfolded for him in a way it had never unfolded before. After preaching through it, it went so well that they went ahead and turned it into yet another book. And I'm recommending that one because it is a book written for everybody. It's not just a straight theology book. He is an excellent writer and has great illustrations and stories to help explain what he is saying. One of the things that he does in that book is he brings up the issue of Israel. Why do I believe what I believe about the second coming of Jesus Christ? My main issue is literally the nation of Israel, okay? A lot of people today, in fact, of my pastor friends, I think I'm the only one that is premillennial. Everybody else is amillennial, and I don't know anybody personally that's postmillennial. With that, my whole reasoning is based off of the nation of Israel. And whenever I get in debates or discussions with other pastors or theologians about their viewpoint, my one question I always have is, what do you do with Israel? Because this is what happened. In AD 70, Jerusalem was destroyed, almost 2,000 years ago. There was no nation of Israel for almost 2,000 years. And so when scholars read the Bible and they read about prophecies of Israel and what would take place before the second coming of Jesus Christ, there wasn't an Israel. So they started something that's called replacement theology, saying that the church has replaced Israel, and all of the promises that were given to the nation of Israel are now given to the church. And with that, numbers and different things had to be taken figurative instead of literal. Several decades before the nation of Israel existed again, there was a scholar who wrote about the second coming of Christ, and when he went to publish it, his friends said, "You can't publish this, because in it you're saying all these things will happen with the nation of Israel, but there hasn't been a nation of Israel for 1,800 years. And he said, I know that. But if I am going to be true to the way I interpret the rest of the Bible, not breaking my rules of hermeneutics that I've used everywhere else, there's going to be a nation of Israel again. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it will happen. Okay? And that is incredible. I'm going to read just a short excerpt, very short, out of Max Lucado's book, and it's actually in the first chapter. But he says this: May 14th, 1948, saw a page turn in the calendar of prophetic history. Circumstances changed when the Jews were given their land. As we will discuss in the following pages, almost all the key events in the end times hinge upon the existence of Israel as a nation. Some examples: the book of Daniel prophesies a covenant between the Antichrist and Israel in Daniel 9:27. This can only happen if the nation of Israel exists. Scripture prophesies a rebuilding of the temple. Isaiah 2, 1-4, and 2 Thessalonians 2:4. Again, Israel must exist for this to happen. Daniel and Jesus forecast an act of utter sacrilege in the temple. Daniel 12 and Mark 13. No Israel, no temple. The war of Armageddon only makes sense if Israel is occupying the land where the particular valley, it's called Megiddo, is actually found. That chapter has all kinds of incredible logic and evidences from history and from prophecy to put in place. One of the major signs of the time that the second coming of Christ will be soon is what has gone on in the nation of Israel in our lifetime. And that's something I don't have time to completely go into here tonight, but that is one of the many reasons why, for me, I think we are in the latter days. We are in the final days, and it won't be long until the return of Christ. Another one is this. 2 Timothy chapter 3 says this: But understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, we would translate that today, narcissist, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power. Avoid such people. That's Paul's description of what it will look like in the last days. And I don't know how you can get a more accurate description of our culture and the things our culture looks up to than that. It's crazy how accurate it is. He goes on and he says, For among them are those who creep into women's household and capture weak women, burdened with sins and led astray by various passions, always learning, never able to arrive at a knowledge of the truth. Just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so these men also oppose the truth, men corrupted in mind and disqualified regarding the faith. But they will not get very far, for their folly will be plain to all, as was that of those two men. Who in the world are Jannes and Jambres? Jannes and Jambres. You have to look more at rabbinical teaching and just kind of the history of what the Jewish rabbis taught. But Jannes and Jambres are the men of the sorcerers for Pharaoh in Exodus. Remember that, as one of the signs that Moses could do, his staff turned into a snake, and there were sorcerers that were able to take their staffs, turn them into snakes, and seemingly do the same type of miracle. But what happened? Moses' snake ate the other two snakes. I love how God has a sense of humor, right? So these men had a form of godliness, but lacked the true power of God. According to rabbinical teaching at this time, it was also Jannes and Jambres that were with the children of Israel when they crossed through the Red Sea and went into the desert. If you remember in Exodus, there were Egyptians that were allowed to go with them. And according to rabbis' teaching of this time, it was Jannes and Jambres who were the ones that really stirred things up to get things going with the first form of idolatry amongst the children of Israel, building the golden calf. So these men who seem spiritual, seem to have religion, seem to have the power of God, and yet they are great deceivers, going around and deceiving weak-willed people. That's the end times. One of the signs that we are getting close to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, those kinds of things have always been around, but one of two things is taking place right now. Either we are seeing an increase in these things, or because we have the internet, we're just more aware of it. Same thing can be said true of the different signs that will happen with wars, rumors of wars, with the natural disasters that will be taking place. Have you ever considered that climate change is real, but it's actually real because it's God showing us the signs of the times that are taking place? One more thing to help wake us up. Jesus is just telling the people, pay attention. Pay attention. You know how to look for something changing in all of these different ways. Pay attention to what's right in front of you. And I think that's incredibly important for us with the times we are in right now. Really quickly, let me close out with the last 3 verses. And now you're going to really be able to see why I said this is really disjointed. And why do you not judge for yourselves what is right? As you go with your accuser before the magistrate, make an effort to settle with him on the way, lest he drag you to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the officer, and the officer put you in prison. I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the very last penny. Huh? Really, when you look at everything we've studied so far in chapter 12, and you look at where we're going in chapter 13, this is seems like it's just a nugget of wise teaching that Luke slid in here. Maybe there's something in here that's connected. I haven't noticed it yet. But the wisdom is good. If you have a conflict with your brother, settle it outside of court because you don't know what's going to happen. We were just talking this weekend. When I say we, I mean my wife and I, not Mindy and me. But we were just talking because we were hearing about a Christian person taking another Christian person. Oh, this is what it was. That's right. It was a church that's in Bend that's getting ready to do a remodel. And as they are remodeling and adding on to their building, they realized that their neighbor had moved the fence line over a long ways onto the church's property. So they went to this neighbor to let them know, hey, this is what we discovered. Here's what the land survey shows. And as part of that, in order to fit the new building on here, we need to move the fence line back. And the person is now suing the church. The interesting thing is the guy goes to that church. He's a member of the church. And I guess at church acts all buddy-buddy and is friends with everybody, but he's actually suing his own church for property that is not his, okay? That's the kind of stuff that Jesus is saying right here. Don't do that. Work it out with your brother or sister in Christ. Paul teaches that in 1 Corinthians 2. You don't take your brother or sister in Christ to court that way. That's not the way we handle things. So good little nugget of advice there. Let's go ahead and do this, and we'll take a few questions right now if you have them. But that's all I have for tonight, so we'll see what happens.